Hi class, this is Mr. Tan, and today we're looking at communication models, and we are on the topic of hospitality operations. So why do you think communication is so important? Well, a lot of you have already said the reason why communication is so important is because you're dealing with accommodation services, you're dealing with lots of different people. If we think about the operations management, dealing with all the different departments, front of office, housekeeping, dealing with the cleaning team, the gym manager, and all the different management for the different departments. So communication is important. But not only is it important for the operations manager, but obviously for the general manager, but also to communicate between departments, to let one department know what another department needs to do, because everything is all interconnected in order to provide the best customer experience within the customer cycle when they actually attend accommodation services in a hotel. So we're going to be looking at different communication models. We're going to be looking at the linear concept model, psychological concept, noise, Shannon-Weaver model, Berlo model, and Schramm model. So these are some of the models which we're going to be looking at. So the communication models, two-way normally. Think fast, talk smart, communication techniques. Research activity here. Research and think about the different types of theories that exist on communication. Prepare a presentation in which you can explain, in a sales context, and explore the advantages and disadvantages, similarities and differences between each. So think of how you would use these in a business context, in terms of pre-sales of accommodation services, if you're dealing with customers, in terms of checking in or checking out. So how would you deal with these? Some of these theories you can research include the Shannon-Weaver 1948 model, the Berlo Model 1960, and the Schramm 1954 model. So the earliest model on communication is the linear model, and it involved 5 basic questions which outline the process of communication. Developed by Shannon and Weaver 1948. Who says what? On which channel? To whom? With what effect? So communication was considered, a one-way process marked by the flow of information from a sender to a receiver. Communication from manager to employee only. So here we can see a linear concept where the sender sends the message, you have the media of the message, and then the receiver, which may lead to action. So the receiver passively receives the message, acts as directed and desired by the sender. In a communication intended to control, manipulate the receiver in order to take action. Assumed that messages while passing through the medium, chosen by sender, reaches the receiver, without any distortion or change. But we know that's not the case, because the medium that is used to send the message, if it's the World Wide Web, if it's the medium used, the channel, then messages can become distorted by a whole range of different reasons. So we need to think about psychological filters. When communication takes place, a psychological filter can distort the message being communicated, represented below, in terms of the speaker, what I thought I said, what I actually said, or in terms of the listener, what I actually heard, and what I thought I heard. So this is because a person, may find they recognize certain information from the communication which they are more familiar with, and therefore, if the person communicating has not adapted the communication style to meet the listener's needs, there may be more psychological barriers present. So, so the communication process itself, as we know, what we think we've communicated may not necessarily be what we hoped the person receiving it should understand by what we were trying to tell them. So this can be done by both the seller and the Shannon-Weaver model, where you've got the message sent and the message received. Shannon-Weaver 1948, were the first to point out that the psychological filters existed. And if we mentioned before, the psychological filters, in terms of noise, exists to kind of distort the message, so the actual message doesn't actually get through in terms of what we were hoping that the person receiving it would understand by it. The basic problem is, he attributed the loss to noise. It was the noise around when the message was being sent that was distorting the actual message. However, feedback was introduced as a corrective to noise. So in the Shannon-Weaver model, we will see that they have the sender, and then encoding the message, and then a channel, and then a decoder, and then the receiver, and then obviously going back to the sender in terms of feedback, in terms of correcting the noise in the middle of the channel. So feedback was not considered to be an integral component because the model conceived the communication process as a linear act, and feedback, another new act of communication. So noise, this is the process open to noise, prevents, distorts communication. Noise, distortion, or hindrance preventing transmission of the message, mind of the sender, to the mind of the receiver in terms of what the sender was hoping he would send. For some, noise stands only for external disturbances, physical environment, machine, telephone, poor printout, or bad handwriting. I mean, how many times have you asked people to write down their names, their first name and surname, and people's handwriting itself, can be part of the noise in terms of you not being able to understand someone's handwriting, so you're getting their name wrong. So here we see the Shannon-Weaver model. So you've got the information source with the sender, and then the encoding process. So if we say, for instance, you're at home and you're doing a Zoom call, so the encoding process is going to be your laptop, or for me it's my laptop, and then the channel is going to be the wide web. Now the decoding process by the person receiving the message doesn't need to be a laptop, it could be their mobile phone, it could be a laptop, it could be a PC, and then you have the person receiving it, the destination, and then you have going back to feedback to ensure that they've actually understood what the message you're actually saying. But in between that, you might have noise. So if we're doing a Zoom call, part of the noise might be other students talking. So while you're doing a Zoom call, people might have their Zoom on mic'd, and people are talking on a telephone, or you've got background TV noise or children in the background, which is creating more noise and disturbance, making it difficult for people to understand and hear what the message actually being said. So the Shannon-Weaver 1948, how communication takes place. You have the source creates the message, and then you have the encoding, and then they select the channel if it's the World Wide Web, and then they send the message through the channel, the World Wide Web, through Zoom, and then the receiver encodes it and then receives the message. And then you have the filters in terms of people's experience, knowledge and feelings, and in between the selecting the channel and the filters, this exists noise in between there which could distort the message. And then number 6, in terms of interpreting the message, and then you have the feedback, going back to number 1 to find out if what was said was correct. So we have the sender, transmits, spreads and communicates the message or operates the electronic device, conceives and initiates the message, with purpose of informing, persuading, influencing, changing the attitude, opinion or behavior of the receiver, decides the symbols, channel, time of sending the message after carefully considering the total situation in which communication takes place. The message, information, written or spoken, to be sent from one person to another. The person represents, the two ends of the system. Could be an individual, a group, or even electronic machines. Most important element, it is organized, structured, shaped, and selective. Product or pre-writing or pre-speaking. Exists, encoding the message. Changing the message from the metal form to symbols, putting ideas, facts, feelings, opinions into words, actions, signs, pictures, and audio visuals. Changing, encoding it. Communication symbol selected, keeping in mind the receiver's ability to understand and interpret correctly. The channel, vehicle or medium which facilitates the sender to convey the message to the receiver. The medium, written, oral, audio, visual. And written mediums like letters, memos, reports, manuals, notices, circulars, questionnaires, minutes. An oral medium, dialogue, face-to-face, interview, telephone, conversation, conference recordings, and so on. And visuals, hoardings, posters, slides, documentary films, TV programs, and advertising. But in an example that I gave, you got the sender, you got the encoder in terms of the PC or laptop being used, and then the channel, which is the World Wide Web. Decoding, the act of translating the symbols into their ordinary meaning. So how we translate that. Total meaning, meaning of words, symbols with tone, attitude, or of sender reflected by the structure of the message and choice of words used by the sender. And filters, these are the people's experience, knowledge and feelings. There's an activity here, so look at these links and see if you can click on these and see what you think about what you mean by what it means in terms of the experience, knowledge and filters. And then you have the receiver, targeted audience, receives, understands, interprets, and tries to perceive total meaning of the message as transmitted by the sender. And then acting, the message manipulates the receiver to act in a desired manner. Response action shows that he has understood the message. The receiver completes the chain of communication by responding to the message. Feedback. It's the loop that connects the receiver to the communication process with the sender. So rather than being linear, it's now two-way communication. So the sender acts as the feedback receiver and gets to know that communication has been accomplished. Feedback plays an important role to confirming that this communication has actually taken place, and to a degree, if the two-way communication process it's more contemporary in nature. The receiver also acts as the sender of feedback to the sender. Both sender and receiver play reciprocal and reversible roles in terms of sending and receiving. Two-way concept considers communication to be a reciprocal process and a mutual exchange of messages. no distinction between the roles of the sender and receiver because the same person plays both roles. The two-way concept involves, the receiver as an active agent in the construction of the meaning of the message. Two-way communication, also known as transactional communication. Essential to make the sale, and the buyer must understand the information to make a buying decision. So, how would this relate to customers at accommodation services? How would you relate this? Well, in one way, you can talk about the finding out more information, the pre-sale, the pre-order. The sender or the customer may send information via an email to confirm, the order, or they might want or send a message to the hotel accommodation services to find out more information on the package, the deal, what it includes. And then obviously the person who's received that message needs to send that message back to find out, and send that message back to confirm what details are actually included. We also have the Berlo 1960 model of communication. And Berlo stresses on the relationship between, the person sending the message and the receiver. So the relationship. Communication skills of both the source and the receiver should be at best only if both salesperson and the buyer are skilled. So there are four main components, and each component has its own sub-components describing, the assisting factors of each. So we've got again the source, the message, the channel, and the receiver. And in between the source and the message, we've got the encoding, how the message is encoded. And likewise between the channel and the receiver, how the message is decoded. So again, if we use the same example as I've given in terms of the lecturer, for instance, being the source and gives out and encodes that message to students via the laptop or PC that I have, and then the channel that is used is the World Wide Web, and then the decoding of the message will be the tools used by the person receiving the message. So some people might use a laptop, some people might use an iPad, some people might use a mobile, and that would be the method in which they decode, and then the receiver. It can be different types of people receiving the message. And then the Berlo model is saying that in terms of the source, the person sending it, communication skills. What are the communication skills? What are their attitudes? What is their knowledge? What is their social system? What is their culture in terms of sending messages out? Do they actually, know in terms of how to communicate to different types of people for different types of culture, and what things mean? If you put your thumb and index and finger together to make an O, in American society, in the Western society, this means A-OK. But yet, in the Japanese society, this means there's something wrong. There's something gone wrong. So, if you're communicating a message, are you communicating it correctly, taking these things into consideration? If you look at the message in terms of, what does the message contain? Into what are the elements? Treatment. What is the structure of the message, and what is the code of the message? So again, how is this message being delivered? If I'm delivering a class, then what am I using? Am I using PowerPoint slides? Am I using pre-recorded PowerPoint slides? Am I using just talking with PowerPoint slides? Am I using videos alongside this? What exactly am I using? What is the message, and how is it being communicated? And then you have the channel World Wide Web, and what senses does it give you in terms of hearing, seeing, touching, smelling, and tasting? And then you have the receiver in terms of their communication skills, attitudes, knowledge, social systems, and culture, and for them to be able to interpret the message, because you can have two different people from different cultures, and one could be, someone could think that they're sending a particular message, but the person receiving it could completely misinterpret what you're actually trying to say. The Schramm 1954 model of communication. Emphasize that both the sender and the receiver take turns playing the role of the encoder and the decoder when it comes to communication, the encoder and decoder. Also, that the communication is incomplete unless until the sender receives a feedback to the recipient from the recipient. So we're talking about, communication doesn't actually take place unless there is feedback from the recipient. And the Schramm 1954 model shows, you got the person who has the encoder, interpreter, and also a decoder in terms of the feedback, and then sends the message. And then again, you've got this interference here, which is similar to the Shannon-Weaver model in terms of noise. So noise, and like the Schramm model, you've got interference, so which could distort the message actually being sent. And then you have the person receiving the message, again, how that person decodes the message, and then the person sending that message back for feedback in terms of encoding the message, and then the person who sent the message originally will decode that message. And again, the message being sent may be subject to interference, or in the Shannon-Weaver model, noise. Plenary. So share one thing that you've learned today. Can you complete the boxes here in this Shannon-Weaver model? What goes first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh? So thank you today from Mr. Tan, and I hope that has been interesting. But it's a question of applying this as well, applying this to when you communicate with your staff, when you communicate across different departments, and when you communicate with your customers. Very important to apply these different parts and to understand the model first, and then to apply it, taking into consideration the noise, the two-way communication, so clarifying that someone actually understands what you're saying, to meet the customer's needs, and also to ensure that your staff understand what you actually require them to do. So again, thank you today from Mr. Tan.